In the quiet, sun-scorched fields of Peach County, Georgia, a faint, putrid smell drifted from a sprawling pecan orchard, unnoticed at first by the locals who passed by on their way to town. It was late July, and the air was thick with humidity, the kind that clings to your skin and makes every breath heavy. Folks thought it was just a dead animal, maybe a raccoon or possum, rotting somewhere in the underbrush. But by the third morning, when the stench grew so vile it stung the eyes of passers-by, a group of curious neighbors ventured into the orchard, following a dirt path to a clearing. What they found stopped their hearts, a sight so horrific it would haunt the small town of Fort Valley forever. 20 bodies lay strewn across the dusty ground, some sprawled face down, others staring blankly at the sky, their limbs twisted in unnatural angles. A few clutched tattered jackets, as if trying to shield themselves from an unseen force. The air buzzed with flies, and the smell of decay mixed with the sweet rot of fallen pecans, creating a nauseating haze. The workers, mostly young men from struggling families across rural Georgia, had been hired for the summer harvest. Now they were gone, their faces frozen in agony, some with jaws clenched so tight it seemed they'd fought death itself. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Within an hour, Peach County Sheriff's deputies swarmed the orchard, cordoning off the area with yellow tape. Clara Hensley, the 54-year-old owner of the orchard, stood at the edge of the scene, her face pale as ash, her hands trembling as she pressed them to her mouth. "I don't understand," she stammered to the officers, tears welling in her eyes. "They were fine just 2 days ago, laughing, working. How could this happen?" Clara explained that the workers were seasonal hires, mostly from nearby counties, living in makeshift tents on the property. They worked long hours under the blazing sun, harvesting pecans and tending the trees. Clara's family provided meals, simple fare like sandwiches, beans, and cornbread delivered daily to the workers' camp. They ate together, slept together. They were like family, she said, her voice breaking. But something about her demeanor, the way her eyes darted nervously, caught the attention of Sheriff Daniel Boone, a seasoned officer with a knack for spotting lies. As the coroner's team arrived, zipping bodies into black bags, the sheriff's deputies scoured the scene. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no weapons, just an eerie stillness. The workers' lunch pails, scattered around the clearing, held remnants of their last meal, half-eaten sandwiches, a thermos of iced tea, and a pot of cold cornbread. The food was carefully bagged for testing, along with water jugs and a few unopened soda cans. By noon, the coroner's initial report sent a chill through the investigation. All 20 men showed signs of acute respiratory failure and cardiac arrest, their faces rigid with muscle spasms, hallmarks of deliberate poisoning. The news spread like wildfire. In Fort Valley, a town of barely 8,000, gossip traveled faster than the truth. Crowds gathered outside the orchard, whispering theories under the shade of oak trees. Was it bad food? Something in the water? One woman asked, clutching her toddler's hand. Others murmured darker ideas, pesticides gone wrong, or worse, a grudge. Social media exploded with blurry photos of the cordoned-off orchard, fueling wild speculation. Some claimed the land was cursed, citing an old Civil War burial ground nearby. Others pointed fingers at Clara, whispering about unpaid wages and her recent financial troubles. Sheriff Boone called an emergency meeting at the station that evening. "This isn't an accident," he said, his voice steady but grim. 20 people don't drop dead in a field from natural causes. We're looking at foul play. The team split into 3 groups, one to analyze the food and water samples, another to review security footage from Clara's property, and a third to interview every person who'd interacted with the workers in the past 72 hours. Clara was brought in for questioning, her face haggard, her hands twisting a frayed handkerchief. "I treated those boys like my own," she insisted. "I'd never hurt them." But a breakthrough came just before midnight. A local farmer, searching for a lost calf, stumbled across a young man in a makeshift tent on the orchard's edge. Samuel Carter, 26, from Macon, was barely conscious, sweating profusely, his pulse erratic. He was rushed to Peach County Hospital, where doctors stabilized him. "He's our key," Sheriff Boone told the team. "If Samuel talks, we might unravel this nightmare." As Samuel fought for his life, lab results trickled in. The cornbread from the workers' last meal tested positive for a banned chemical called toxaphene, a potent neurotoxin outlawed in the U.S. since the 1980s. Odorless, tasteless, and deadly in small doses, it could kill within minutes if ingested. The discovery ruled out accidental poisoning. Someone had deliberately laced the food. The question was who and why. Clara's story began to crack under scrutiny. She claimed her longtime cook, Margaret, prepared the meals alone, but Margaret swore Clara had been in the kitchen that morning, hovering over the stove. "She brought a small bottle, said it was seasoning," Margaret said, her voice trembling. "I didn't think much of it." A grainy security camera from a neighboring farm showed Clara entering the kitchen at 9:30 a.m., carrying a black plastic bag. For 6 minutes, the camera feed glitched 6 minutes that could have changed everything. By the next morning, Samuel was awake, his voice weak but clear. "We ate lunch like always," he whispered to Sheriff Boone. "I was late, had to fix a tractor, so I didn't eat right away. When I got back, they were gone. Collapsing, choking, foam at the mouth. I ran, hid in the tent. I was so scared." His words painted a chilling picture, and they pointed to one person, Clara Hensley, the woman who'd fed them all. But why would a respected orchard owner, a widow who'd poured her life into the land, commit such an atrocity?
The answer lay buried in bank records.
Clara had mortgaged the orchard to a shady investment firm 6 months earlier, borrowing $80,000 to cover a failed crop season. With interest piling up and the harvest underperforming, she was drowning in debt. The workers, owed nearly $6,000 in back wages, had grown restless, threatening to walk off the job. Clara's desperation was mounting, and the sheriff's team was closing in. The investigation into the Peach County Orchard massacre deepened as Sheriff Daniel Boone and his team pieced together the fragments of Clara Hensley's unraveling life. The small town of Fort Valley buzzed with unease, its residents grappling with the reality that a woman they'd known for decades, someone who'd shared pecan pies at church potlucks, could be at the heart of a mass murder. Clara's orchard, once a symbol of local pride, now stood as a grim monument to betrayal, its gates locked and its trees untended. Clara sat in the interrogation room, her hands folded tightly, her eyes avoiding the sheriff's piercing gaze. "I didn't do anything to those boys," she repeated, her voice thin and strained. "I fed them, gave them work. Why would I hurt them?" But the evidence was mounting. The toxaphene found in the cornbread wasn't a random contaminant, it was a controlled substance, one that required access and intent. Sheriff Boone leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Clara, we know you were in the kitchen that morning. We have footage. We have the bottle. Help us understand." Clara's composure faltered, her lips trembling. She insisted Margaret, her cook of 10 years, handled all the food prep. Margaret, a soft-spoken woman in her 40s with a weathered face, was brought in next. She sat nervously, twisting her apron in her hands. "I cooked like always," she said. "Cornbread, beans, some iced tea. Clara brought me the ingredients, said she wanted everything just right. I saw her sprinkle something into the batter, but she said it was just salt."
I trusted her. The sheriff's team dug deeper into the kitchen's operations.
The grainy footage from the neighbor's camera showed Clara lingering near the stove, her movements deliberate. During the 6-minute gap in the feed, she was alone with the food. A search of her farmhouse turned up a small, unmarked plastic bottle tucked behind a sack of flour. Lab tests confirmed traces of toxaphene inside, matching the chemical in the cornbread. Clara's explanation that it was an old pesticide from her late husband's shed felt flimsy. "I didn't even know what it was," she claimed. "Maybe one of the workers got into it." But Samuel Carter's testimony added a new layer. From his hospital bed, he recalled a tense moment the day before the tragedy. "The guys were mad," he said, his voice hoarse. "Clara owed us 2 weeks' pay. Some were talking about quitting, maybe reporting her to the labor board. She heard us, got real quiet. I saw her talking to her son, Ethan, later that night. They looked off." Ethan Hensley, Clara's 25-year-old son, was a wild card. A former mechanic who'd returned home after losing his job in Atlanta, he'd been helping with the orchard's maintenance. Tall and lanky, with a guarded demeanor, Ethan was brought in for questioning. "I wasn't even at the orchard that morning," he said, his voice clipped. "I was fixing a truck in town." But his alibi didn't hold. Cell phone records placed him at the orchard during the critical hours, and a text from Clara at 9:15 a.m. "Read, make sure it's done quiet." Ethan's face paled when confronted with the message. "She meant the truck," he stammered. "She wanted it fixed fast." The sheriff's team wasn't buying it. A search of Ethan's truck uncovered a toolbox with a hidden compartment containing a syringe and a vial of yellowish liquid. The lab confirmed it was toxaphene, diluted but still lethal. Ethan's fingerprints were all over it. "I didn't touch the food," he insisted, sweat beading on his forehead. "I just helped Mom with some things."
Financial records painted a clearer picture.
Clara's $80,000 loan came with a brutal repayment schedule, and the orchard's poor yield left her short. Ethan, meanwhile, had his own debts, a $40,000 loan from a sketchy online lender tied to a failed crypto scheme. Text messages between mother and son revealed growing panic. "They're gonna take the land," Clara wrote 2 weeks before the murders. Ethan replied, "We'll handle it. They'll back off." The workers' demands for payment had pushed Clara to a breaking point. One worker, overheard by Samuel, had threatened to sue. "She can't keep stringing us along," he'd said. Clara, eavesdropping from the farmhouse porch, had stormed off. The sheriff's team began to suspect a motive: eliminate the workers, erase the debt, and save the orchard. But could Clara, a church-going widow, really orchestrate such a cold-blooded plan? A second survivor emerged, offering a crucial clue. Jacob Lee, a 22-year-old worker who'd skipped lunch due to a stomach bug, recalled seeing Ethan near the workers' camp just before noon. "He was carrying a thermos, said it was extra tea for us," Jacob said. "He left real quick, didn't stick around." The thermos, found at the scene, tested positive for toxaphene residue.
Sheriff Bohne presset Clara harder.
"You knew what was in that cornbread," he said, sliding the lab report across the table. "You brought the bottle.
You were in the kitchen.
Why?" Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she stayed silent. Margaret, re-interviewed, admitted she'd seen Clara pour something into the batter but was too scared to question her boss. "She's been good to me," Margaret whispered. "I didn't want to believe she'd do this." The investigation turned to the orchard's chemical shed. Behind stacks of fertilizer bags, deputies found a locked metal box containing several vials of toxaphene, some half-empty. Clara's fingerprints were on the lock. "I used it years ago for pests," she said weakly. "I forgot it was there." But the box's pristine condition suggested recent use, and a receipt from a black market supplier in Alabama, found in Ethan's truck, linked the chemical to a purchase made just weeks earlier. As the evidence piled up, Clara's story unraveled. She admitted to financial strain but swore she never meant to kill. "I just wanted them to get sick, maybe leave," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought a little would scare them off." But the lethal dose enough to kill 20 men in minutes suggested intent far beyond a warning. Ethan, meanwhile, clammed up, refusing to implicate his mother further. The town reeled as details leaked. Social media posts called Clara a monster and Ethan a coward. Families of the victims, many from impoverished communities, gathered at the orchard's gates, leaving flowers and candles. One widow, clutching her infant son, sobbed, "They just wanted to work. Why take them from us?" Sheriff Boone knew the case wasn't closed. Clara and Ethan were involved, but the precision of the poisoning hinted at a deeper plan. Was Margaret more than a bystander? And why had Ethan been so quick to leave the scene?
The answers lay in the orchard's shadows, waiting to be unearthed.
The air in Fort Valley grew heavier as the investigation into the pecan orchard massacre intensified. Clara Hensley and her son Ethan were now the prime suspects, but Sheriff Daniel Boone sensed the case was far from solved. The precision of the crime, the exact dosage of toxaphene, the careful staging of the meal suggested a level of calculation that seemed beyond Clara's frantic denials. The town, once tight-knit, was fracturing under the weight of grief and suspicion, with neighbors turning on neighbors, whispering about who else might have known. Clara's second interrogation was a turning point. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the sheriff's station, she sat hunched, her hands trembling as she clutched a styrofoam coffee cup. "I didn't mean for this," she said, her voice cracking. "I just wanted them gone, not dead." Sheriff Boone leaned in, his tone measured. "Clara, you put poison in their food. You expect us to believe you didn't know what it would do?" Her eyes darted to the floor, and for the first time, she mentioned Ethan. He helped. He said he'd take care of it. I didn't ask how." Ethan, brought in separately, was unraveling. His earlier bravado had faded, replaced by a jittery nervousness. "I didn't know it was that strong," he muttered, his hands fidgeting with the cuffs of his jacket. "I thought it'd just make them sick, like Mom said." But the evidence told a different story. The syringe found in his truck, coated with toxaphene, matched the concentration in the cornbread. A text from Ethan to an unknown number, recovered from a burner phone, read, "Got the stuff? It'll work fast." The number traced back to a shady chemical supplier in Mobile, Alabama, known for selling banned pesticides. The sheriff's team zeroed in on Margaret, the cook, whose story was starting to fray. During her third interview, she admitted to noticing an odd smell in the kitchen that morning. "It was sharp, like bleach, but I thought it was cleaning supplies," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. When pressed about Clara's behavior, Margaret hesitated. "She was different that day. Kept checking the food, telling me to hurry. I saw her pour something from a little bottle, but I didn't ask. I should've." Her guilt was palpable, but Sheriff Boone wasn't convinced she was innocent. A search of Margaret's trailer, just a mile from the orchard, turned up a surprising clue, a handwritten note tucked under a stack of recipe cards. It read, "Keep quiet, you'll get your share." The handwriting matched Clara's, and a bank statement showed a $2,000 deposit into Margaret's account 2 days before the murder, sum she couldn't explain. "Clara gave it to me for extra work," she claimed, but her trembling hands betrayed her. The investigation took a new turn when Samuel Carter, now recovering, provided a critical detail. "I heard Ethan arguing with someone the night before," he told deputies. "It was near the shed, late, maybe midnight. I couldn't see who, but Ethan sounded mad, said something about no one finding out. I thought it was about the money we were owed." The shed, already searched, was revisited. This time, deputies found a hidden compartment in the floor, containing a ledger listing chemical purchases and a map of the orchard with the workers' camp circled in red.
The ledger was a Goldmine.
It detailed payments to a supplier named RJ for special product, dated just weeks before the murders. Sheriff Boone's team tracked down RJ, a former farmhand turned black market dealer in Alabama.
Unterpressure, RJ.
Admitted selling toxaphene to Ethan, claiming the young man said it was for clearing out pests. RJ's phone records showed multiple calls from Clara's number, contradicting her claim of no involvement. Meanwhile, the victims' families began arriving in Fort Valley, their grief turning to rage. At a makeshift memorial outside the orchard, a young mother named Lila stood clutching a photo of her husband, one of the workers. "He sent every penny home for our baby," she sobbed. Clara knew him since he was a kid. How could she? The community's anger spilled onto social media, with hashtags like Justice for the 20 trending locally. Some demanded the orchard be burned down, others called for Clara's arrest to be televised. Sheriff Boone's team worked around the clock, piecing together the timeline. The morning of the murders, Clara had delivered the ingredients to Margaret, including a small bottle she claimed was seasoning. Ethan, seen on camera near the kitchen, had carried the food to the workers' camp himself. Samuel's testimony confirmed Ethan's presence, and Jacob Lee, the second survivor, recalled Ethan's odd behavior. He kept saying, "Eat up, boys, big day tomorrow," Jacob said. He didn't usually talk like that. A forensic analysis of the cornbread revealed a chilling detail. The toxaphene wasn't just sprinkled in, it was mixed thoroughly, ensuring every bite was lethal. This wasn't a haphazard act, it was meticulous. The sheriff's team began to suspect a broader conspiracy. Was Clara protecting someone else? Ethan's burner phone revealed texts to a third party, someone referred to only as T. One message, sent the night before the murders, read, "Make sure Mom doesn't back out." The mysterious T became the focus. Deputies combed through Clara's contacts and found a match: Thomas Hensley, her estranged older son, living in Savannah. Thomas, a 32-year-old accountant with a history of gambling debts, had visited the orchard a week before the murders. Phone records showed he'd called Ethan multiple times, including a 40-second call at 9 a.m.
on the day of the poisoning.
When brought in, Thomas was polished and composed, denying any involvement. "I haven't been to the orchard in months," he said. But GPS data from his phone placed him in Fort Valley that morning. As the net tightened, Clara's resolve crumbled. During a late-night interrogation, she broke down. "It was all falling apart," she sobbed. "The bank was going to take the orchard. The workers wouldn't wait for their money. Ethan said he had a way to fix it, to make them leave. I didn't know he'd go that far." Her confession implicated Ethan as the one who mixed the poison, but she admitted to buying the toxaphene, claiming she thought it was a milder chemical. Ethan, confronted with his mother's statement, snapped. "She told me to do it," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "She said we'd lose everything if we didn't act. I just followed her lead." The blame shifting left the sheriff's team with a puzzle. Who was the mastermind, and was Thomas the missing link? The Peach County orchard case had become a labyrinth of lies, with Clara and Ethan Hensley pointing fingers at each other, while the shadow of a third figure, Thomas, loomed larger. Sheriff Daniel Boone's team was relentless, working through sleepless nights to untangle the web of deceit. Fort Valley's residents, meanwhile, were gripped by a mix of horror and fascination, crowding the sheriff's station for updates and flooding local diners with heated debates. The orchard, once a source of community pride, was now a ghost town, its gates chained, its pecans rotting on the ground. Clara's confession had opened a floodgate, but her story was riddled with holes. She claimed she only wanted to scare the workers, yet the lethal dose of toxaphene suggested otherwise. During a grueling 6-hour interrogation, she revealed a chilling detail: Ethan had sourced the chemical, but she'd approved its use. "He said it'd just make them sick," she whispered, her voice hollow. "I didn't know it'd kill them." Sheriff Boone pressed her on Thomas's role, but she clammed up, her eyes darting nervously. He's got nothing to do with this, she said, too quickly. Ethan, meanwhile, was crumbling under pressure. His earlier defiance had given way to desperation. I didn't mean to kill anyone, he told deputies, his voice shaking. Mom said we had to do something, or we'd lose the orchard. I thought a little poison would just send them packing.
But the evidence painted a darker picture.
The syringe in his truck, the texts to the supplier, and his presence at the camp all pointed to deliberate action. A recovered message from his burner phone to T. read, "It's done. They won't talk now." Thomas Hensley's arrival at the station shifted the dynamic. Polished in a pressed suit, he carried himself with an air of detachment, as if the orchard's horrors were a distant rumor. "I was in Savannah working," he said, his voice smooth. "I haven't seen Mom or Ethan in weeks." But his phone's GPS data told a different story, placing him at the orchard for 3 hours on the morning of the murders. A grainy gas station camera from Fort Valley showed him filling a canteen with water just miles from the scene, hours before the workers ate their fatal meal. The sheriff's team dug into Thomas's life. His accounting job was a front he'd been fired 6 months earlier for embezzling client funds to cover gambling debts. Bank records showed he owed $60,000 to a loan shark in Atlanta, with payments due days after the murders. A text from Thomas to Clara, sent 2 weeks prior, read, "We need to clear the slate, Mom. All of it." Sheriff Boone's gut told him Thomas was more than a bystander, was the architect. Margaret, the cook, was re-interviewed with a sharper focus. Her $2,000 deposit, unexplained and suspiciously timed, suggested complicity. Under pressure, she admitted to overhearing Clara and Ethan arguing about fixing the problem days before the murders. "I thought they meant paying the workers late," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But then I saw Clara with that bottle, and Ethan was so strange that morning. I should have said something." Her failure to act made her a potential accessory, and she was detained for further questioning. The investigation returned to the orchard's chemical shed, where a second search uncovered a hidden safe. Inside were receipts for toxaphene purchases, signed by Ethan but addressed to Thomas's Savannah apartment. A handwritten note in the safe, in Thomas's precise script, listed the workers' names with notations. "Trouble owes $300, talks too much, won't leave." All 20 names matched the victims. Sheriff Boone's team realized the plan wasn't just about dodging wage, it was about silencing anyone who might expose the family's financial ruin. Samuel Carter, now stronger, provided another piece of the puzzle. "I saw Thomas once, maybe a week before," he told deputies. "He was at the orchard, talking to Ethan by the shed. They stopped when they saw me." Thomas looked angry. Samuel's memory of the workers' unrest added context. "We were fed up," he said. "Some guys were gonna call a lawyer. Clara knew, and she wasn't happy." The victims' families, meanwhile, were organizing. A candlelight vigil outside the orchard drew hundreds, with photos of the workers' sons, fathers, brothers lined up along the fence. A local pastor led a prayer, his voice breaking as he spoke of greed and betrayal. Social media amplified the outrage, with posts demanding justice and calling Clara the pecan killer. A few defended her, citing her years of community service, but they were drowned out by the chorus of anger. Forensic analysis offered a breakthrough. The toxaphene wasn't just in the cornbread, it was in the iced tea, a detail Clara hadn't mentioned. Jacob Lee, the second survivor, confirmed Ethan had handed out the tea personally, urging everyone to drink. "He said it was a hot day, we needed it," Jacob recalled. The thermos, recovered from the scene, had Ethan's fingerprints and traces of the poison. This wasn't a mistake, it was a double dose, ensuring no one survived. Sheriff Boone confronted Thomas with the evidence, the receipts, the texts, the GPS data.
Thomas Kuhl Fakkade kriegt.
"You think I'd kill 20 people over money?" he snapped. But when shown the note with the workers' names, he froze. "That's not mine," he stammered, but his handwriting was unmistakable. A search of his Savannah apartment uncovered a laptop with deleted emails to the Alabama supplier, recovered by the tech team. One email, sent 3 days before the murders, read, "Need it fast. No questions." Clara, faced with the mounting evidence, finally broke. "Thomas told us we'd lose everything," she sobbed. "He said the workers were a liability, that they'd ruin us." Ethan listened to him.
I let it happen.
Her admission confirmed the trio's collusion. Thomas planned, Clara approved, and Ethan executed. But the question of who mixed the poison remained. Was it Ethan's carelessness, or Thomas's cold calculation? As the sheriff's team prepared to charge all three, a final clue emerged. A worker's phone, found in the orchard, contained a voice memo recorded hours before the murders. In it, a worker named Caleb whispered, "Clara's acting weird. Ethan too. They're hiding something. If anything happens, check the shed." Caleb's voice, now silenced, was the final push the investigation needed. The Peach County orchard case was no longer just a local tragedy, it was a national scandal. News outlets descended on Fort Valley, their cameras flashing at the chained gates of Clara Hensley's property. The story of a mother, her 2 sons, and a massacre born of greed dominated headlines, from Atlanta's evening news to online forums buzzing with theories. The sheriff's station was a hive of activity, with deputies sifting through evidence and preparing for a trial that would shake Georgia to its core. Clara Hensley, Ethan, and Thomas were now in custody, each held in separate cells to prevent collusion. Clara's frail appearance belied the weight of her actions. During her final interrogation, she admitted to orchestrating the plan but insisted Thomas was the driving force. "He said we had no choice," she whispered, her voice hollow. "The bank was coming for the orchard. The workers were threatening to sue. Thomas said he said it'd be quick." Her tears did little to sway Sheriff Boone, who saw through her attempt to shift blame. Ethan, meanwhile, was a wreck. His confession came in fits and starts, punctuated by sobs. "I didn't want to kill them," he said, his voice breaking.
"Thomas got the poison.
"He told me it'd just make them sick, maybe scare them into leaving. I trusted him." But the syringe in his truck, the thermos with his fingerprints, and his presence at the camp pointed to more than blind trust. Ethan had poured the toxaphene into the tea, ensuring a second deadly dose. When confronted with Caleb's voice memo, he broke down completely. "I didn't know they'd die like that," he cried. "I just did what they told me." Thomas remained the enigma. Polished and articulate, he maintained his innocence, even as the evidence stacked against him. The ledger, the emails, the GPS data all tied him to the crime. A search of his Savannah apartment uncovered a burner phone hidden in a desk drawer, containing a single text to Ethan, "Finish it.
No loose ends."
Sheriff Boone's team traced the chemical purchase to a meeting Thomas had with RJ, the Alabama supplier, 2 weeks before the murders. RJ, now cooperating, confirmed Thomas paid $5,000 for the toxaphene, specifying it be strong enough to send a message. Margaret, the cook, was charged as an accessory. Her $2,000 deposit, the note from Clara, and her failure to report the suspicious bottle made her complicity undeniable. "I didn't know it was poison," she sobbed during her hearing. "I just did my job." But her hesitation in the kitchen, her silence despite noticing the odd smell, sealed her fate. She was offered a plea deal in exchange for testifying against the Hensleys, which she tearfully accepted. The victims' families, meanwhile, were grappling with their loss. At a community center in Fort Valley, they gathered to plan a memorial, their voices raw with grief. Lila, the widow, spoke at a press conference, her baby asleep in her arms. "They took my husband for a few $1,000s," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. He was worth more than their orchard, their money, their lies. The community rallied around the families, raising funds to cover funeral costs and support the orphans left behind. Social media continued to explode, with hashtags like Pecan Massacre and Justice for Fort Valley trending nationwide. True crime podcasters descended on the town, interviewing locals and speculating about the Hensleys' motives. Some painted Clara as a desperate widow driven to madness, others called her a calculating killer. Ethan was portrayed as a pawn, manipulated by his mother and brother, while Thomas's polished exterior earned him the nickname The Suit among online sleuths. The sheriff's team uncovered a final piece of evidence in the orchard's shed, a small notebook, hidden in a rusted tin, detailing the workers' schedules and debts. Clara's handwriting marked 7 names with red XS, matching the list found in her bedroom. The notebook also contained a chilling entry: after lunch, problem solved. The date matched the day of the murders. Sheriff Boone realized the plan wasn't spontaneous, it was months in the making, with Thomas likely pulling the strings from Savannah. A re-examination of the kitchen revealed a hidden detail: a small burn mark on the counter, where toxaphene had spilled and corroded the wood. It was near where Clara stood in the camera footage, confirming she'd handled the poison. Forensic experts estimated the dose was 10 times what would cause illness, enough to ensure death. The iced tea, laced by Ethan, was a backup plan, guaranteeing no one survived. The trial date was set, and Fort Valley braced for the spectacle. The courthouse, a brick building on the town square, was fortified with extra security. Reporters camped outside, their satellite trucks clogging the streets. The victims' families, wearing buttons with their loved ones' faces, filled the courtroom's front rows. Clara, Ethan, and Thomas would face charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and poisoning with intent to kill. The prosecution aimed for the maximum penalty: life without parole for Clara and Ethan, and possibly the death penalty for Thomas, given his apparent role as the mastermind. As the trial loomed, Sheriff Boone reflected on the case's toll. "This town won't ever be the same," he told a deputy.
20 lives, gone for nothing.
And for what? A piece of land. The orchard, now abandoned, was a stark reminder of the cost of greed. Weeds crept over the paths, and pecans fell unharvested, rotting in the Georgia heat. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source: a letter found in Clara's bedroom, addressed to her late husband.
"I'm sorry, John," it read.
"I tried to save what you built, but I lost my way. Forgive me." The letter, dated the night before the murders, suggested Clara knew the plan's outcome but went along anyway, driven by desperation and her son's influence.
The trial of Clara, Ethan, and Thomas Hensley gripped Fort Valley, turning the sleepy Georgia town into a media circus.
The courthouse steps were packed with protesters, reporters, and grieving families, their signs demanding justice for the 20 workers whose lives were snuffed out in a single poisoned meal. Inside, the courtroom was a pressure cooker, with every seat filled and the air thick with tension. Clara sat hunched, her gray hair limp, her eyes fixed on the floor. Ethan fidgeted nervously, his face pale, while Thomas maintained a steely calm, his suit pressed and his expression unreadable. The prosecution laid out a damning case. This was no accident, the district attorney declared, pacing before the jury. Clara Hensley, Ethan Hensley, and Thomas Hensley conspired to murder 20 innocent men to save their failing orchard and dodge their debts. They used a banned poison, toxaphene, with cold precision, ensuring no one survived. The evidence was overwhelming: the ledger, the receipts, the burner phone texts, the camera footage, and the confessions of Clara and Ethan. The notebook with the red XS, found in the shed, was displayed on a courtroom screen, each name a silent accusation. Clara took the stand first, her voice trembling as she recounted her financial ruin. "The orchard was all I had left of my husband," she said, tears streaming down her face. The bank was going to take it. The workers wouldn't wait for their pay. Thomas said we could make them leave. I didn't know it'd end like this. Her plea for sympathy fell flat. The jury's faces remained stony as photos of the victim smiling in family snapshots flashed on the screen. Ethan's testimony was chaotic. He admitted to mixing the poison but insisted Thomas and Clara pushed him into it. I thought it'd just make them sick, he said, his voice breaking. Thomas got the stuff, said it was safe. Mom told me to do it. He broke down when shown Caleb's voice memo, sobbing as the worker's words echoed, "If anything happens, check the shed." The jury exchanged glances, their verdict already forming. Thomas, the last to testify, was defiant. "I'm innocent," he said, his voice steady. "I was in Savannah. I didn't touch the food or the poison." But the prosecution dismantled his alibi. The GPS data, the emails to RJ, and the note in his handwriting were irrefutable. When confronted with the text to Ethan, "Finish it. No loose ends," he faltered, claiming it referred to a business deal. The jury wasn't convinced. Margaret, testifying under her plea deal, painted a vivid picture of Clara's control. "She was in the kitchen, watching every move," she said. "She brought the bottle, poured it herself. I should have stopped her, but I was scared." Her testimony sealed Clara's role as the orchestrator, with Ethan and Thomas as willing accomplices. The victims' families spoke during the sentencing phase, their words cutting through the courtroom. Lila, the widow, held up her son's photo. "He worked for them, trusted them," she said, her voice shaking. "They took his future for a few dollars." Other families shared similar stories, fathers who sent money home, brothers saving for college, sons supporting aging parents. The courtroom wept as their voices filled the silence. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. Clara was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy, sentenced to life without parole. Ethan, convicted on the same charges, received life with a chance of parole after 30 years, given his cooperation. Thomas, deemed the mastermind, faced the death penalty, a rare sentence in Georgia but justified by the crime scale. As the verdicts were read, Clara collapsed, sobbing, while Ethan stared blankly. Thomas's face twitched, but he said nothing. Fort Valley struggled to heal. The orchard was sold at auction, its proceeds donated to the victims' families. A memorial park was planned on the site, with 20 trees to honor the fallen workers. The town's residents, scarred by the betrayal, avoided the area, whispering about ghosts in the pecan groves. Social media posts mourned the loss, with "Never Forget the 20" trending for weeks. Sheriff Boone, exhausted but resolute, addressed the press. "This case shows what greed can do," he said.
20 lives, gone for nothing.
"We'll make sure their names are remembered." The victims' families, though devastated, found some closure. Lila, speaking to a local reporter, said, "Justice won't bring him back, but it means he didn't die for nothing." The Hensleys' legacy was one of infamy. Clara's letter to her husband, read in court, became a haunting footnote: "I lost my way."
Etans remorse, if genuine, came too late.
Thomas's cold calculation defined him to the end. The orchard, once a symbol of growth, was now a graveyard, its lessons etched in the town's memory.